I couldn't move. The door was crushed, smoke filled my lungs, and fire was crawling toward me. Then suddenly, he was there, silent, steady, pulling me free. And just when I thought I'd never forget his face, he vanished into the dark like he'd never existed. The city's late hour held its breath until the black SUV tore around the corner and hammered the lamp post with a metallic scream. Glass tinkled across the pavement like hail. Steam feathered up from the crumpled hood. Smoke bled from under it in dark, impatient ropes. Inside, the driver's silhouette jerked sideways, then went still. Clara Vance blinked through powdery airbag dust, dazed by the bitter tang of propellant and the stinging heat licking at her face. The door beside her wouldn't give. She shoved at it with both hands, felt the frame grind against twisted metal, and heard nothing but her own unsteady breath. Her mind did the arithmetic of fear. What is burning? How long do I have? And then a shadow crossed her window. A man. No uniform, no baton of authority, just a grease-stained jacket, sleeves pushed to his elbows. He tested the handle, jaw set the way people's jaws set when they've already decided the outcome. "Stay still, ma'am," he said, voice calm enough to make space inside her panic. The door. It stuck, she managed, throat raw. Her hands shook. She hated that he could see it. He wedged his fingers into the seam, tendons in his forearms knotting as he pulled. The metal complained, shrieked, moved a fraction. Heat gathered under the hood, a kind of breathing. He shifted his stance, feet planted, breath measured, and heaved again. Clara tasted fear like iron. In meetings, she liked to say that pressure revealed truth. Now the truth was simple. She was trapped, and he refused to let that remain the end of the story. The frame gave with a sudden wrenching pop. Fresh air shouldered the smoke aside. "I've got you," he said. No flourish, no pause. He angled his body into the car, braced her shoulder, and guided her out one careful inch at a time, as if she were glass. Clara's heels skittered over broken safety shards as he half-carried, half-steered her away from the SUV. They had only cleared the curb when the hood caught. First a low, angry hiss, then a sharp bloom of flame. The night strobed white and orange. The shock wave thumped the air in her chest. Heat kissed the back of her neck. She stumbled and would have gone down if his hand hadn't closed around her forearm, steady as a post. "Easy," he said. "You're out. You're okay." She realized then that his palm was calloused, the kind of roughness that doesn't apologize. He scanned her quickly, eyes at her pupils, hands hovering near her ribs and wrists, checking for the wrong kind of stillness, the wrong kind of pain. When she winced, he adjusted his touch like he already knew where bruises bloom. "You," her voice cracked. "You saved my life." He didn't answer with words. He just gave the smallest nod, the kind that says the conclusion is obvious and doesn't need a meeting to confirm it. Smoke drifted over them, warm and sour. The wreck crackled like a fire thinking about becoming worse. "Wait," she said as he straightened, as if already part of him were turning away. She was Clara Vance in every room she entered, and the world rearranged around that fact. But this man didn't seem to register the gravity of her name or the orbit of her power. That unfamiliar imbalance tugged at her. "At least tell me your name." He looked at her, eyes clear, face unreadable. No gloating, no awe, only a tired steadiness. As if somewhere beyond the wreckage he had somewhere he needed to be and someone counting on that promise. "Get somewhere safe," he said, quiet, not unkind. Then he released her arm and stepped back into the night's dark margins. No handshake, no request, no exchange of anything that would make this a transaction. Clara took a breath she didn't know she had been holding and watched him go, a figure thinning into distance while the SUV burned behind her like a cautionary tale. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid bite away. Her heartbeat steadied in increments. She was used to writing checks to solve problems, to summoning entire teams with a single call. Here, on a street littered with glittering glass and heat, the only currency that mattered had been courage, and he had spent it without hesitation. For the first time in years, she felt something beneath the armor she wore to work, the raw, startled gratitude of a person who had been seen as human before being seen as powerful. He turned the corner and was gone. She was left with smoke, the echo of his voice, and a question that wasn't going to let her sleep. Who walks away from a moment like that without even leaving a name? Ethan Cole closed the apartment door behind him with the quiet precision of a man who never wanted to wake a sleeping child. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied, its pale glow catching the worn edges of his jacket. He hung it on the hook by the door, the grease stains dark against the chipped paint. For a moment, he stood still, listening. The hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the old wall clock, and then small feet padding across linoleum. "Daddy." Lily's voice carried a mix of delight and reproach, the way only a 7-year-old could. She rushed from her room in flannel pajamas patterned with faded stars, hair mussed into a wild halo. "You're late again." Ethan crouched, catching her in his arms, and let her small weight press against his chest. Her hair smelled faintly of shampoo and crayons, the scent of school days and bedtime stories. He kissed the top of her head before answering, voice soft. "Had to help someone tonight, Pumpkin. But I'm here now." She leaned back, eyes wide and searching. "Help who?" He hesitated just a beat, long enough to picture flames kissing twisted metal, a stranger's terrified eyes, and the echo of an explosion behind him. He shook it off and smiled instead. "Just someone who needed a hand. That's all." Her frown smoothed. Children didn't press for details the way adults did. They trusted the simplest answers. She wrapped her arms tighter around his neck. "I don't like when you're late," she murmured, her voice small against his shoulder. "I know." He stood and carried her back toward her bedroom, stepping around the stack of laundry he hadn't folded yet. "But I'll always come home. That's a promise." She made a face that was half smile, half suspicion, the same look her mother used to give him before she left for good. Ethan pushed the memory aside as he tucked Lily beneath her quilt. He smoothed the blanket over her, brushing crumbs of some secret snack off the pillow. "Story?" she asked, her eyelids already heavy. "Tomorrow night." "Deal." He kissed her forehead, lingering long enough to feel her breathing slow. She nodded, drifting toward sleep, one hand curled around the worn corner of her stuffed rabbit. Ethan sat by the window in the living room, pulling the curtain just enough to look out at the street below. The night seemed too calm after what he had walked away from. His hands still carried the tremor of force used against metal, the memory of another life's weight braced against him. He didn't regret stopping. That woman, whoever she was, would be alive in the morning because of him. But he wanted no part of the world she clearly belonged to. Wealth, danger, spectacle. His was simpler. Pay the rent, fix cars, pack Lily's lunches. Every choice funneled into one purpose, keeping her safe. The explosion's light still burned against the back of his eyes, but the sound that followed it, the way Lily's voice had filled the apartment just now, was louder. That was the only reward he needed. He leaned back, hands folded behind his head, and told himself it was already over. Somewhere across the city, smoke still hung in the air. But here, in this small 2-bedroom apartment, his daughter slept. And that was enough. For 4 days, Clara Vance walked through boardrooms, conference calls, and press interviews with her usual armor intact. Sharp words, sharper eyes, and the authority of a woman who could tilt markets with a single decision. But beneath the surface, she was restless. Every time she tried to sleep, she saw smoke curling against night air, felt the grip of rough hands pulling her free, heard the steady voice telling her to stay still. The newspapers wouldn't leave the accident alone. Headlines declared, "Billionaire CEO survives fiery crash." Pundits speculated about brake failures, distracted driving, or sabotage. Investors demanded assurances. Clara gave them soundbites and reassurances polished to perfection. But the truth, the only part that mattered, she told no one. Not even her most trusted advisors. Because she didn't know his name. At her penthouse desk, she flicked through security reports while her assistant hovered nervously. "Pull surveillance from every traffic camera near the crash site," she ordered. "Street corners, storefronts, anything." The assistant hesitated. "Ms. Vance, the police already." "Police answer to procedure. You answer to me." Clara cut in, not unkindly, but without room for argument. "Find him." She hadn't said why. She didn't need to. People were used to her demands arriving stripped of context, like thunder without explanation. But this was different. This wasn't a new contract or a merger to close. This was personal in a way she couldn't quite name. Nights passed with her replaying the moment in her mind. The shock in her lungs when air finally rushed in, the brush of calloused fingers steadying her, the way he walked away without asking for anything. Everyone in her world wanted something: shares, favors, proximity to her power. He wanted nothing. That absence weighed on her more heavily than any demand could have. 2 weeks into the search, she sat in the back of her sleek black town car, eyes fixed on a tablet displaying grainy footage. The frame caught him, tall, jacket smeared with grease, walking away from the wreck while the night still burned behind him. Blurry, faceless, but it was enough. Clara leaned closer, heart giving a rare, unguarded kick. "There," she said softly. "That's him." Her assistant frowned. "It could be anyone, Ms. Vance." "It's not anyone." Her voice left no space for doubt. "Find where he works. Find where he lives. Just find him." For the first time in years, Clara wasn't chasing a deal, an acquisition, or another rung on the ladder of power. She was chasing a man who refused to be chased, a shadow who had turned his back on her world without hesitation. And Clara Vance wasn't a woman who gave up. When her car finally rolled to a stop one evening outside a modest auto shop on the edge of town, the neon sign sputtering above a row of dented cars, she stepped out in heels that didn't belong in gravel. Inside, through a dusty window, she saw him, sleeves rolled up, bent over the hood of an old truck. Her breath caught before she could school it into control. The man from the shadows wasn't a phantom after all. He was flesh, muscle, and grease under fluorescent lights. "It was him," she whispered to herself. "You." The clang of a dropped wrench echoed through the shop as Clara stepped inside. The smell of motor oil and gasoline clung to the air, sharp and foreign compared to her world of polished marble and perfume-scented conference rooms. Ethan Cole straightened slowly from beneath the hood of the truck, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since lost the battle against grease. She stood just inside the doorway, perfectly composed yet undeniably out of place, dark heels clicking on concrete, a tailored coat catching the light of the hanging bulbs. For once in her life, Clara felt like the intruder. Her voice, usually a weapon, slipped out in something softer. "It was you." Ethan froze, rag in hand. His eyes flicked toward her, recognition flashing, but it wasn't pride, or relief, or even surprise. It was caution, the kind that comes from years of learning what not to let in. He said nothing at first, only tightened his grip on the rag. "You pulled me out of that car," she continued, stepping closer. The words carried weight she rarely allowed into her tone. "You saved my life." "I did what anyone would have done," Ethan replied flatly, turning back to the truck as if the bolts under the hood suddenly required all his attention. Clara blinked, thrown off balance. No one dismissed her like this. People leaned forward when she spoke, eager to impress, to gain favor. He gave her his shoulder. "No," she said firmly, moving another step into the space between them. Anyone else would have pulled out their phone and recorded it, or waited for the fire trucks. "You risked your life." At that, he looked at her, eyes steady, jaw tight. "Because I don't want anything from you." The words hit harder than he could have known. Clara's world was built on transactions. Every smile had a price, every favor an unspoken ledger. But this man had carried her away from fire and still managed to owe her nothing. Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights and the distant rhythm of traffic outside. Clara studied him, broad shoulders, calloused hands, weariness etched into the corners of his eyes. A man used to labor, to holding weight no one else noticed. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan added at last, voice low, final. Clara's instinct was to push back, to remind him who she was, to demand the space she was never denied. But something about his guarded posture stopped her. This wasn't a boardroom. He wasn't a competitor to outmaneuver. He was a man who had already shown her more honesty than she was used to receiving. For the first time in years, Clara felt the rare sting of being unwelcome, not because she wasn't enough, but because she wasn't needed. And yet, instead of retreating, she felt something else rising: determination. "I don't give up easily," she said, her eyes locked on his. And she meant it. The next week, Clara found herself drawn back to the shop. She told herself it was curiosity, or perhaps gratitude unfinished. But when her car pulled into the gravel lot again, she knew the truth was less practical. She couldn't shake the image of his steady eyes, the sound of his voice as the flames swallowed the wreck. Inside, Ethan worked with sleeves rolled up, grease streaking his forearms like ink. He didn't look up when she entered, though she sensed he had already registered her presence. Clara waited, hands folded in front of her, the silence thick with words neither of them seemed willing to say. Then the bell above the shop door chimed again, lighter this time. A child's footsteps pattered across the concrete. "Daddy!" The small voice rang out, bright as sunlight. Clara turned, startled, as a little girl with tangled hair and a backpack too large for her shoulders rushed forward. Ethan's entire posture changed, hard edges softening, his tired stance melting into warmth as he bent to catch her. He lifted her easily, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Hey, Pumpkin. How was school?" The girl grinned, missing a front tooth. "We had art today. I painted a dragon." Clara stood still, as if intruding on a sacred moment. She had never seen him like this, gentle, open, vulnerable in a way that stripped away the walls she had felt only days earlier. Lily noticed her then, blinking at the stranger in heels. "Daddy, who's that?" Ethan set her down gently before answering. His eyes flicked toward Clara with a guarded expression. "She's someone I helped once." Clara crouched slightly, lowering herself to Lily's height, her voice losing the crisp authority it carried in boardrooms. "Is this your little girl?" "Yeah," Ethan said, tone soft but final. "She's my whole world." The phrase landed heavier than any business deal Clara had ever struck. She looked at the child's wide eyes, then back at Ethan's expression, the way he wrapped his life around his daughter like armor. Suddenly, she understood. This was why he had walked away that night. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much about something else. Clara smiled, a rare, unguarded curve of her lips. "She's lovely," she said quietly. For a moment, the billionaire and the mechanic simply stood there, bound not by gratitude or obligation, but by the presence of a child who made sense of everything Ethan was willing to fight for. And Clara, who had grown up in echoing mansions filled with nannies instead of family, felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. Envy, yes, but also longing. The icy armor she wore to survive her world cracked just a little, enough to let the warmth in. Clara returned again and again. At first, Ethan bristled each time her sleek car pulled up outside the dusty shop. He never asked why she came back. She never offered an explanation. Instead, she would step inside with a cup of coffee balanced neatly in one hand, its steam curling against the fluorescent light. "You look like you could use this," she said once, setting it carefully on his workbench between scattered wrenches. He glanced at it, then at her, suspicion in his eyes. "I don't need charity. It's just coffee," she replied evenly, though her pulse jumped. For a woman who commanded empires, it was strange how much weight rested in those 3 words. On other days she arrived with boxes of car parts, expensive, gleaming pieces she claimed were extras from her company's suppliers. Ethan shook his head every time, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm not taking your money. Not your parts either." "Then let's call them conversation starters." She raised an eyebrow, daring him to object. Slowly, something shifted. What began as resistance softened into an uneasy truce. They started talking, not about money or favors, but about life. Ethan spoke in fragments at first, stories of Lily's stubborn streak, her endless questions at bedtime, the way she could turn even bad days good with a single laugh. Clara listened, surprising herself with how carefully. One evening, as they closed the shop together, Clara leaned against the truck he had been working on, her heels clicking against the concrete. "I grew up in houses bigger than this whole block," she admitted, her voice low. "And yet I can't remember anyone ever tucking me in at night. Just staff, schedules, silence." Ethan paused, rag in hand, watching her. For the first time he saw not the CEO, not the billionaire, but a woman confessing a truth she rarely allowed air. "When you saved me that night," Clara continued, her eyes fixed on the floor, "I thought you were just a shadow, a stranger who would vanish. But now," she hesitated, then looked up at him, her composure slipping. "Now I don't want you to disappear again." The words lingered between them, raw and unpolished. Ethan's chest tightened. He had spent years keeping the world at arm's length, building walls around his daughter and the small life they'd carved out. Yet here was Clara Vance, untouchable billionaire, speaking like someone who wanted nothing more than a place in the quiet. He wanted to tell her no, to remind her of the gulf between their lives, but something in her gaze pressed against his defenses. She wasn't asking for his admiration or his awe. She was asking not to be alone. Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. as if the act of caring for her might be the most dangerous thing he could do. Whispers spread before Ethan even knew there was something to fear. A neighbor mentioned seeing a glossy car outside the shop. A customer joked about how the Ice Queen of Wall Street was getting her tires rotated by a local mechanic. At first, Ethan brushed it off. Gossip came and went. But gossip turned into headlines, and headlines carried teeth. When the first photograph appeared online, a blurred shot of Clara Vance stepping out of her town car in front of his shop, the quiet world Ethan had built began to fracture. By the next week, reporters loitered across the street, pretending to scroll their phones, lenses glinting in the sun. Investors whispered about Clara's mechanic friend, feeding speculation that the untouchable billionaire was wasting her time in a greasy garage. For Ethan, it was worse than invasion. It was danger. One morning, he found a photographer crouched near Lily's school gates, camera aimed at children spilling onto the playground. He gripped the man's shoulder hard enough to make him flinch. "Delete it," Ethan growled, his voice low and sharp. The photographer stammered excuses, but Ethan didn't wait. He dragged the memory card out and crushed it in his fist before walking away, fury pulsing through him like heat. That night, when Clara arrived again, Ethan didn't greet her. He didn't even look at the coffee cup she set on the counter. "This is exactly why I didn't want you in our lives," he snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. Clara froze, the sting of his words cutting deeper than any headline. "Ethan, I never. You think you can just drop in here with your cars and your cameras chasing you? I've worked too damn hard to give Lily peace. And now they're circling her like she's some prize." His hands trembled, not with weakness, but with the rage of a father whose child had been dragged into something she never asked for. Clara swallowed, her voice breaking in a way that was rare for her. "I never wanted to hurt you. Or Lily. I wanted to thank the man who saved me. And maybe—" She stopped, her breath catching as the truth surfaced, fragile. "Maybe I wanted him to save me again. From myself." The admission hung in the air, vulnerable and dangerous. Ethan's silence felt heavier than anger, heavier than shouting. He turned away, shoulders rigid, as if her words had struck something he refused to name. Clara stood in that silence, the distance between them now wider than wealth or poverty could measure. And for the first time since the crash, she wondered if her pursuit had been selfish, not gratitude, not curiosity, but a desperate attempt to tether herself to the only moment she had felt human in years. For days after his outburst, the garage felt emptier than usual. Clara's visits stopped, and though Ethan told himself that was what he wanted, the silence gnawed at him. He poured himself into work, fixing engines long past closing time, letting the clatter of tools drown out thoughts he refused to admit. Lily noticed. She always did. Children had a way of sensing what adults tried hardest to hide. One evening, after dinner, she climbed onto the couch beside him, her knees tucked under her nightgown. "Daddy." Her voice was soft, careful. "Yeah, pumpkin." He didn't look up from the paperwork spread across his lap. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip before speaking again. "Why don't you let Miss Clara be our friend? She looks lonely." The question pierced him more deeply than he expected. Ethan set the papers aside and turned to her. Lily's big eyes blinked up at him, filled with a wisdom that belonged to someone far older. "She's not part of our world," he said, the words slow, heavy. "People like her, they bring trouble. Cameras, noise, things that don't belong here. But she smiles when she sees you," Lily said simply. "And when she saw me." She tilted her head. "Isn't that what friends do?" Ethan's chest tightened. He had built walls around their lives for a reason. To keep Lily safe, to keep her childhood untouched by the chaos that had once broken his. But hearing his daughter speak so plainly, he realized he had been teaching her only half the lesson. Protection was important, yes, but so was connection. What good was safety if it meant teaching her to shut the world out entirely? That night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan sat by the window with the curtain drawn halfway, the city lights flickering beyond. Clara's face came to him, her rare, unguarded smile, her confession whispered in the shop. "Maybe I wanted him to save me again." He exhaled, long and low. For years, his life had been about survival, not choice. But now the choice pressed against him like an engine demanding repair. Continue walking away, or let someone in. Not for Clara, not even for himself, but for the little girl who deserved to see what it meant to trust. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure which path scared him more. The next time Clara returned to the garage, she half expected the door to be locked, the windows dark, the space abandoned of him entirely. She carried no coffee, no gifts, no excuses. Just the quiet resolve of someone prepared to hear the final word. Ethan was bent over an engine when she stepped inside. The fluorescent light caught the streak of silver in his hair, the familiar grease stains marking his sleeves. He didn't glance up at first, and Clara braced herself for the cold dismissal she thought was coming. But then he straightened, turned, and without a word, held out a wrench. The gesture was so simple, so unexpected, she blinked in surprise. "You wanted to be here," he said, voice steady but softer than before. "Fine. Then help me fix this engine." Clara stared at the tool in his hand. For years, she had signed contracts worth billions, her pen reshaping industries. Yet no signature had ever made her heart stumble the way this small offering did. Slowly, she reached out and took it, the metal cool against her palm. A smile broke across her face, real, unpolished, nothing like the perfected one she wore for cameras. She rolled up her sleeves, ignoring the faint smear of oil on her wrist, and stepped beside him. Ethan watched her for a moment, and something in his expression eased, the weight he carried settling into something lighter. For the first time, he wasn't saving her and she wasn't chasing him. They were just two people in the same space, hands on the same work, building something together. Lily's laughter carried faintly from the back room, where she colored at a small table, the sound weaving into the rhythm of tools clinking and bolts turning. Clara glanced toward the noise, then back at Ethan, her eyes bright. In that modest garage, billionaire and single dad found common ground. Not in money, not in power, not even in the rescue that had bound them in fire. But here, among engines and oil and the quiet presence of a child, they discovered something rarer, the beginning of trust. It wasn't about saving anymore. It wasn't about owing or being owed. It was about standing side by side, sleeves rolled up, willing to try. And for the first time in years, Clara Vance felt like she was no longer alone. Ethan turned a bolt, handed her another tool, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles.